It is great to be back on the Cancer Research Africa segment on establishing successful research scholarship. I am Professor Camille Ragin, and I am honored to be the guest chief scientific anchor for this segment. I am excited about what we will be covering today. It is one of the most important, if not the most important aspects of grant writing. It is namely writing specific aims for your grant. I am even more excited about our scientific presenter today, Professor Camille Ragin. No one, and I mean no one, is more qualified to cover this topic than her. She is an R01 scientist who is very well funded and has a global cancer research program that includes sites in Africa. She is a great friend of African scientists, and I think she's really an African scientist herself. She is my sister, as we are very close and we have decades of collaboration through our consortia. Before she starts her presentation, I really want you to get to know her and know her work, because I feel that is going to add to your cancer research and give you quite a lot of golden nuggets about how to become a great scientist. Welcome, Professor Camille Ragin.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Okay, so first of all, we're twinning.
That's right.
We're twinning with an African outfit, so I love that. So I see that you are ready to be on this segment. I so much love your outfit. Outstanding. So I think it's really very important for our viewers to really get to know about you. Can you talk about a little bit about your background, including how you got to be where you are?
Okay, again, it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Professor Camille Ragin, and I am based at Fox Chase Cancer Center in Philadelphia in the United States. But I was originally born and raised in Jamaica, so I am a Caribbean queen.
An African queen too, we're claiming you.
Caribbean and African queen, yes, absolutely. And for the past 20 years, I have been building a global oncology research program, really focusing on cancer in all of the African diaspora. And I am a molecular epidemiologist by training. And so I do a lot of work in the community, but also do a lot of lab-based work. I have used those skills to really build out a network that allows me and others to be able to interact and collaborate, to be able to do meaningful science that's going to really truly impact all of our populations of African ancestry. And so about 16 years ago, I formed the African Caribbean Cancer Consortium. And that consortium involves several countries in Africa where we have teams that are doing research and collaborating within their local context, but also collaborating across borders, between the different countries. We also have collaborators in several countries in the Caribbean and also collaborators in the US. And it's really all about how do we come together and work together collaboratively to really address cancer among our Black population. So it's really a pleasure for me to have this opportunity today to present, and I really look forward to the conversation and the presentation.
Yeah, great. So, I mean, you talk about the consortium, the AC3 consortium, which is great because we moved into that realm of consortia science. Can you talk a little bit about, from having built this consortium, what you see as the advantages, especially for early stage investigators being part of consortia, and how that could really benefit and help their science?
Yes, absolutely. There are so many advantages to the consortium. One of them that I think really is critical is this opportunity to be able to network and to be among peers that are like-minded in how they want to impact. There's an opportunity to learn from each other. And of course, you know, capacity building occurs naturally in that setting. So, you know, most importantly, when it comes to career development and really launching your careers, you have a network of experts that you can rely on, that you can depend on to gain advice, objective criticism, to be able to really help to improve and advance your skills so that you can be successful in this space.
Outstanding. You mentioned that you do have a critical group of investigators that you work with in the Caribbean and in Africa. Any similarities between Africa and the Caribbean, or differences, or that you?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, there are so many similarities. I will talk about the similarities first. I think number one, many of the countries the investigators are operating in low resource settings where the skills are there, but the infrastructure may not be there to be able to support the science and the work that needs to be done. So that's one of the biggest similarities that I find, not just for the scientists, but even for the populations as well. Some of the barriers and the challenges that we face when we think about cancer control, there are lots of similarities between those population groups. Differences may be that there are cultural differences, and that impacts, how we work and how we help to promote prevention when it comes to cancer. So also learning about those differences is impactful because it allows us to be able to share and learn from each other and learn how to innovatively address some of the concerns that we have in each of our settings.
Okay. So I know you're going to be talking about specific aims, but we have you here, so I'm going to pick your brain because it is great to have somebody who is as outstanding as you to learn from. First of all, talk about some of the funding agencies that you have successfully received funding from, and talk about how you see African investigators may be able to benefit from looking at those areas of funding.
Yeah, so I've been able to get funding. My first really big grant was through the American Cancer Society. There are lots of different mechanisms. Actually, so many more funding mechanisms now are available in that funding agency to be able to fund your science. In addition to the ACS, I've also gotten funding from the NIH, the NCI, as well as the other institutes, the NIMHD. Those are some of the main funders that I've had, but I've also now more recently had opportunity to work with pharmaceutical industry to be able to get funding through those mechanisms as well, to be able to do the science that we need to do.
That's okay. So tell us a little bit about, if you are going to say, okay, you know what? You are a highly funded scientist, you've been very successful. What are some of the things that you think sort of gave you an edge? I know you're going to be talking about specific aims, but can you summarize what you feel has given you an edge to be so successful in this area?
I think one of the things that has really given me an edge is to have people in my corner, to have supporters who can advocate for me, but also mentors as well, who can help me along the way to develop and hone in my grant writing skills in order to be successful. I think that those are two critical things that when you think about career advancement, they're very, very important. And it certainly is reflective of how I've been able to accomplish certain things today, is to really have someone or multiple persons that I could rely on to provide advice, career advice, as well as advice in terms of honing your skills for grant writing.
Balancing. The number one thing that I hear, especially from women in Africa, how do you balance this? How do you balance career with other things that we have in our lives?
Yes, it's a challenge every day. It's a challenge. It's real.
It is real. The struggle is real.
It's real. But we certainly do manage. It's about setting boundaries. That's very, very important, and allowing yourself to not just to continue to push and to strive for being the best that you can be, but also allowing yourself to rest, allowing yourself to have that time to regenerate, because if you don't do that, you will not succeed because you will burn out. So I think that is one of the things that I've learned, how to have that balance, is to be able to also think about yourself and to be really focused on self-care in the process.
Thank you for saying that, because, a lot of times for women, you want to prove that you're great. You want to prove by having all those high successes, and we don't sometimes do self-care. So give us examples of how you do self-care.
For me, self-care is very simple. I shut my door and I lay in bed and I just relax and I watch movies for hours.
Amen.
And that does a lot for me.
Yeah, we're very similar in that. I just kind of shut down and just watch movies. Anything outside the kind of science that we do, that does the work. So I have a couple of more questions for you. First of all, how many countries have you visited in Africa?
Oh, let me think. So I have visited Nigeria.
Okay, of course.
Of course. I have been to also South Africa. And I've been to Kenya.
Okay.
And I'm getting ready to go to Namibia soon.
Okay. Okay, trick question. You better answer this right. Or you can plead the fifth. Which of those countries do you like the best?
Oh no, I am pleading the fifth for sure.
Okay, let's do something that is not going to get
the best.
They are all the best. Let's do something that is not going to get you into trouble. What dish do you like the best from Africa? That going to get you into trouble as well?
Yes.
Okay, I'll let you plead the fifth because you have a very active research program in Africa. We don't want them stoning you. Okay,
that's right.
That's a good one. We know that in October, all roads lead to Kenya, right? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, we are so excited. This is the first time that the AC3 conference will be in the continent of Africa, and it will be in Kenya. We are just so excited, and the local team is just so energized and really getting ready to have a spectacular conference. So the conference is actually going to be on October 11th to the 14th. It's 4 days, and it will be in Mombasa, Kenya. So we're going to have, a whole day of training that will occur. And of course, there is a community engagement component, and then we will have a series of scientific presentations and opportunities for networking and collaborating. So we're just really looking forward to it.
I'm there. There's no I'm there. I can't wait. And funny enough, that will be my first time in Kenya, so I'm looking forward to it. I've been to multiple countries in Africa except Kenya, so I'm looking forward. I'm so looking forward to that. This is really outstanding. So let's switch gear now. What do we have to look forward to relative to your presentation on specific aims?
Right. So what I am going to really talk about is how to actually pull together a strong specific aims page, one that is going to be compelling, that will really help to advocate for your application to be funded. So I'm going to really dig in and talk about the different components that make up the specific aims page and how we need to pull it together. So I'm going to actually go through the steps of one way that you can actually begin to pull it all together so that it comes out as a strong product.
Yeah, great. Anything else you want to share before you get into your presentation?
I am just so delighted, and I really do have to say thank you to Cancer Research Africa, because this is such a spectacular platform that is able to help to allow us to be able to disseminate valuable information that's going to really help build the careers of our African scientists. And I'm just so glad and honored and humbled to have the opportunity to be a part of it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ragin. I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Hello. So today I'm going to be talking about the specific aims page, which is actually one of the most important parts of a grant application. And so before I move forward, let me first provide an overview of what I will cover today. I'll first provide a little bit of an overview of what the specific aims page is and how important it is. I'll give you a little bit of tips on things that you need to bear in mind when you're writing this document. And then I'm going to actually dig in. And this is where we talk about the different components that make up the specific aims page. There are actually 4 very distinct paragraphs that we will talk about that will make up the document. And I'm going to actually give you a little bit of a cheat sheet process for how you actually pull that all together. First, by creating a bulleted outline, and then how you expand those bullets into actual full text, which with the ultimate goal of ending up with a specific aims page document. And then the last thing that I'll cover will be just some common pitfalls that many investigators tend to have happen, which results in their application perhaps not coming across as strong as it needs to be. So let's go right in. All right, so the specific aims page really is a template. It's considered sort of a template that will ultimately be used to write the rest of your proposal. So it is probably the most important component to any grant application. This document is a single page, usually for many funders. It only requires 1 page of write-up, but it serves to introduce the reviewers of your grant pretty much everything that is important and exciting about your proposal. And what we want is for this document is to really serve to hook those reviewers' interest, because they're the ones that will advocate for you when your application is being reviewed in a study section review or grant review panel. So here are some things that you need to bear in mind. When a grant is being reviewed, usually it is a series of investigators that will actually review several applications in one sitting. But typically, one grant gets 2 to 3 reviewers. There are 2 to 3 persons that are assigned to review your application, and the rest of the panel are not assigned. So these are the non-assigned reviewers. And what you will find is that in a grant review meeting, the review panel members will be doing 2 things. They'll all be listening to the opinions of those assigned reviewers, the 3 persons who read your grant. And they're always going to, and they're at the same time, while they're listening to the opinion of those reviewers about your grant, they're also trying to read through your proposal to get a gist of what your study is about. So they'll oftentimes look at the title, the abstract, and your specific aims page, and sometimes some sections of your research strategy. But the specific aims page really is the anchor of all of it, because what you will find is that despite the fact that there are 2 to 3 persons who have read that document, all of the reviewers in that room will have an equal vote in establishing your proposal's impact score. And so this is why your aims page is so important. It needs to be very clear, and it needs to be easy to understand, okay? And so it needs to contain everything there is that is important about your grant, but not with a lot of details. And sometimes that's a little tricky and hard to accomplish, but hopefully after we go through this presentation today, you'll have a sense of how you might be able to accomplish that. The goal here is that there must be a flow of logic, and that logic must be compelling to the reviewers. And it must be so compelling that while the non-assigned reviewers are listening to their critique of your grant, they're also able to follow through by looking at your specific aims page and understand exactly what is being communicated. So in order for you to write an effective specific aims page, what is most critical is that you really understand what it is that is required and how each component within the specific aims page is supposed to deliver a specific message. And so that's what I'm going to go into today. So for a specific aims page, there are actually 4 major paragraphs. There's the introductory paragraph. There's a paragraph that we call the what, why, and who. There's a paragraph which would be the outline of the actual specific aims of your proposal. And then there's a payoff paragraph. And so one strategy that I'm going to suggest today, which is what I will review with you in this presentation, is how do you put that all together? And what I suggest is that the first thing before you begin writing is to create a bulleted outline for each of those 4 paragraphs. And we're going to actually go into details on how to do that. So let's start with the introductory paragraph. So first, let's understand what is the purpose of the introductory paragraph. the goal here for this first paragraph is that you need to frame the subject of your proposal as the most important problem that needs to be addressed. That problem needs to be communicated very clearly in that paragraph. And so in the paragraph, there are four messages that needs to be delivered. One, you need to have an opening sentence. You need to also describe the current knowledge about that particular topic that you're studying. You also need to identify what is that gap in knowledge. What is that thing that is missing that will prevent you from actually moving forward to address the problem? And then the last part of that introductory paragraph is going to focus on a statement of need. What is it that needs to happen, or what is it that needs to be accomplished to fill the gap and address the problem? And then the last part of that is, in addition to that statement of need, you also need to talk about the potential consequences if that need is not met. Hopefully, this will really deliver a message to the reviewers that there is a real problem, there is a gap that needs to be filled, and there are consequences if that need is not filled. So let's talk about the opening sentence. The opening sentence is probably the most important part of the entire document. It needs to immediately capture the attention of the reviewers. It needs to highlight that important area that your application is going to address. It needs to be arresting. That will really immediately command the reviewer's attention. When they read it, they'll go, this is a problem, okay? Here's an example. So the first bullet is just a statement. This is not a problem, but oftentimes you'll see at the beginning for an opening sentence in a specific aims, something like this. Cancer currently affects more than 50% of the female population, and it's responsible for over 100,000 deaths and $1 million in direct healthcare costs each year. Pretty strong statement, but it's not really highlighting a problem. The last two bullets actually are more so focused on the problem. Here's one of them. Screening for cervical cancer has been incorporated into evidence-based guidelines, but achieving this target to date remains elusive in clinical practice. Now you can see just from reading that there's a problem with that. There's a problem because guidelines are in place, but we're not meeting the targets. What about this last one? Prostate cancer kills more Black men than any other race or ethnic group in the world. I'm sure that's pretty striking, right? What you need to think about is an opening sentence that's going to really hammer home that message that there is a real problem. And that allows the reviewer to begin to pay attention from the very beginning. The next part of the introductory paragraph is the section that talks about the current knowledge. And here, what we need you to focus on is to just come up with a few bullets that really outlines what is currently known, what is known in the literature. And this helps to inform the reviewers about the area in your project, that field of work that you are proposing. It also helps the reviewers to grasp the importance of the research that you're proposing. And so, and in addition to that, it sets up for the next part of that paragraph, which is going to address the gap or the unmet need. That's going to really drive your application. So a bullet outline that really leads the reviewers from the oldest known facts that are most relevant to what is currently known in the field. No more than 4 to 6 bullets. That's all that you need to outline the current knowledge. And then you roll right into the gap. How do you define the gap or the lack of something? Simply just come up with a bullet or two that's very simple and direct. It needs to be related to the preceding section, which is the current knowledge. Okay, and so the gap really is the next step of something that is needed that needs to advance the field, but it can't be because it's missing. That piece of information that you need to address is missing. So it's a really very important bullet, and everything that you describe after this in your specific aims page is going to evolve from this gap. What is that lack of something? That is what your application is going to be addressing. So the final component to the introductory paragraph is the statement of need and also the potential consequences if that need is not met. So you've already defined the gap or outlined a lack that exists. And so what you need to now do is to highlight through a bullet of what the statement of need is. What is really needed to fill that gap? And also several bullets of what really is the consequence if we do not fill this gap or if this need is not met. This will allow the reviewer to begin to appreciate the importance of what you're proposing, identifying that there's a real problem, identifying that there is a gap that is preventing you, the scientists, from moving forward in advancing the goal that you have in your field, and also recognizing that if this work is not funded or if this gap is not met, then there are consequences. It means that you would not be able to advance in the way that you should. And so that's one of the reasons why this introductory paragraph and all of these different components to the introductory paragraph is so important. So let's move on to the second paragraph, which is the what, why, and who. And the real purpose here for this paragraph is to convince the reviewers that the results of your project will meet the need that you delineated in the very first paragraph. What you're telling the reviewers is that you have a solution. You have a solution to that problem. You have a solution to that gap in knowledge that you outlined. And now you're going to propose to fix it. And so this paragraph has 4 pieces. One is the long-term goal. The second is the application's overall objective. And there's a difference between the two, and we'll go into that in the next few slides. The third is the central hypothesis. And sometimes if you're applying for certain types of grants or projects, you may not necessarily have a central hypothesis, but you may have an overall objective. So it depends on what type of grant you are writing or what application you're pursuing. You may or may not have a central hypothesis, but if it is hypothesis driven, then you do need to have a central hypothesis. And then the last part of that paragraph is your rationale. So how about the long-term goal? Really simple, straightforward. You only need 1 bullet. And the goal here is to define the continuum of research that you are going to be pursuing over multiple periods of grants moving forward to address the problem that you define. So in other words, what it is a big picture statement of what your research goal is. That's your long-term goal. It has to also be very realistic, and it needs to be achievable in a finite period of time. And your long-term goal is not the goal that you're proposing to achieve in the application. It's where you want to get to in order to address the problem. Okay? All right. So the next part, which is really focused on what you're doing in the application, is the overall objective. And this, again, is another single bullet that you need to just simply define what will be accomplished by the research that you're proposing in this application. And that overall objective needs to also address the need that you outlined in paragraph 1. It has to link back to the fact that this need is critical and urgent, and so it really needs to be able to connect very well with what you have said before. It also needs to link back to the long-term goal, and that is to show that this objective is sort of the next step that you need to take to achieve your long-term goal. Let's move to the central hypothesis and how it's formulated. So here, these bullets really are to focus on the research that this is where you hone in now on the actual research that you're proposing in the application to achieve the overall objective. Your central hypothesis must be testable. It must be something that you test in order to attain the overall objective that you defined. Or another way to put it is the central hypothesis must be your best bet out of all the alternatives as to what explains the phenomenon that you're investigating. Once you've defined the central hypothesis, another component of that is to set up the purpose for this piece is to set up the presentation of your specific aims. And so your central hypothesis actually is going to really help you connect to the aims, the specific aims that you will actually describe in terms of the steps taken to, or the approach taken for your research project. And so there has to be some connection between the hypothesis and the specific aims. So what you need to think about is when you craft the bullets for the central hypothesis, make sure that this hypothesis has readily identifiable parts that will each lead to an aim that you can test, that you can propose that will test that part of the hypothesis. The last part of the what, why, who paragraph is your rationale. And the purpose of this is to convey why you want to do the research. And it's really very simple because your rationale has to link back to the framing of your problem that you proposed. The bullet needs to communicate that once the project's been completed, you're actually able to take that next step to move forward. And that is the reason for the research. And so just think very carefully about explaining why you are doing what you're doing and to show how it links back to addressing the need that was outlined in the first paragraph. So there are 4 takeaways. This paragraph will allow the reviewers, once they've read it, to know the continuum of your research. They're going to know what the next step is in that continuum. That's your overall objective. And they'll want to know why you want to take that step, which is your rationale. And they also want to know what's your best bet on how to take that step. And that's your central hypothesis. Okay, so we've gone through the first 2 paragraphs. The third paragraph really isn't a paragraph. It's actually the specific aims. And the purpose of this is to define how you're going to test the part of your central hypothesis, or how are you going to actually describe, how are you going to actually obtain the overall objective of your application. And typically, most specific aims will be about 3 to 4, depending on the type of project that you propose. If it's a much smaller project that perhaps would take about a year or 2, then maybe you could even have 1 or 2, but no more than 4 specific aims should be described. The last part of the specific aims page, that last paragraph, is the payoff paragraph. And the purpose of the payoff paragraph is to really define what needs to be expected for a return on your application. What is the outcome? What is the impact that your application would have if you were to get funding? And it's really a very important part, because this statement, this paragraph, actually helps to recruit advocacy from your non-assigned reviewers who are reviewing your application. It's going to be very important to win their hearts, as well as the primary reviewers, the primary, secondary, and tertiary reviewers who are actually reviewing and reading your application in detail. And so this paragraph really needs to cover the expected outcomes and also talk about the generality regarding the positive impact of your application. Expected outcomes. Here you're talking about bullets that will really describe the outcomes of the aims that you defined in your specific aims section. And so just simply write a bullet that talks about the expected outcome for each of your aims. That's all you need to do for now. And then another bullet that summarizes how your expected aims, how your expected outcomes collectively, all together, how do all of these specific aims attain your overall objective for the project? And then for the generality regarding positive impact, here what you're really trying to communicate is generally the fact that your expected outcomes will positively impact the field. And so you simply just need a simple bullet that provides that positive overall impression of your project. What is the impact that this work will have? on the problem that you've stated or addressing the need that you've outlined in your earlier paragraph. So once you've had this sort of bullet outline of all of the 4 paragraphs, you pretty much have a shell of your specific aims page. What do you do next? Well, one suggestion is leave it alone, put it down, walk away, let it sit for a day or 2, and then come back to it, review it. Think about the different sections again. Think about the purpose, what each of those paragraphs are supposed to achieve, and try to improve the bullets that you indicated in your outline. And then once you've gotten to the point where you feel that there's nothing more you can do, that you've sort of, gotten to a place where this is it for you, then this is where you seek out mentorship. Speak to your research team, talk to your collaborators, share your outline with your mentors to really get feedback. This is where you can get feedback on the overall plan to make sure that you are really going on the right track. And this is really important. I think a lot of scientists need to take advantage of this opportunity to be able to get constructive criticism, to be able to refine your outline before you even begin writing. And once your outline then has been optimized, then the next goal really is to expand those bullets into actual sentences. And the goal here is to do it in such a way that it creates a very compelling draft of your specific aims document that perhaps would not need a lot of refinement because you would have really hit the important points that you needed to when you defined your bullets. So how do we expand the bullets into full sentences? I'm going to just talk about that briefly. Most importantly, you have to be sure that the sentences flow logically and seamlessly from the preceding sentence to the other. You want to be able to maximize readability. You want the reviewers to read it and understand the process of thinking. And so it's very clear, very important to be clear in how you build the sentences around your bullets that you've outlined. So let's go back to the first paragraph, the introductory paragraph. Remember, there are 4 parts to that: the opening sentence, the current knowledge, the gap in knowledge, and the statement of need. Opening sentence we've talked about. We already know that it needs to be compelling. The current knowledge. What you do in this section of the paragraph is you fill out, pull out the bullets and turn them into sentences. You talk about the studies that have been done, which really outlines the current knowledge. And you cite only the most important references. You don't need to put everything in there. It really doesn't need to be extensive. What you need to do is to highlight what is known in the literature and use the most important references to communicate that. The gap in knowledge or the lack of something, you could start your sentence by saying, what is not known is, and you describe it. Or say, however, there remains a clear lack of whatever, okay? The statement of need and the potential consequences if the need is not met, you can frame your sentence by using words like critical or urgent, right? To make, but most importantly, when you write your statement of need, you have to make sure that it's justifiable. Don't make a statement that appears over the top, because then the reviewers will have some concern about your thought process. But at the end of the day, when you're done writing out those bullets into sentences, by the end of reading that paragraph, the reviewers should be able to be completely convinced that there's a gap, and that gap is impeding progress in the field. But most importantly, remember, and I should have pointed this out before, when you highlight the gap and the need for something, make sure that that gap and that need is something that is relevant to the funder, because that is also very important. It's very important to make sure that your view of the problem and the gap that you see has to align with what the funder also agrees with, that is important. Because if they don't agree that this is an important area to fund, it doesn't matter what you write. your application may not be viewed as impactful. And so it's very important to make sure that the science that you propose is within that space that is relevant to the funder. So how do we build out the bullets for the why, what, and who paragraph? Again, seamless flow of logic. You go from the broadest to the narrowest. If you recall, the why, what, who paragraph outlines the long-term goal, the overall objective, the central hypothesis, and the rationale. Okay, so you expand each as a single sentence. You need one sentence that outlines the long-term goal, one sentence that outlines the application's overall objective. And an example of how you start that sentence is the overall objective for this application, which is the next step in attaining our long-term goal is, and you define it. The central hypothesis and how it's formulated, this is where you describe the best bet of how your overall objective can be obtained. And so you simply just need a sentence that says, our central hypothesis is that, and you describe it. And then the other part of that is to expand a bullet that really describes how the hypothesis was formulated. And that is your way of communicating why was this your best bet. And the why was this your best bet is usually supported by preliminary work that you may have done or work done by others. So this is where you have the opportunity now to describe some of the preliminary work that you might have done that really supports the hypothesis that you're proposing, or describing work done by others that really supports the hypothesis that you're posing. The rationale, which is the last part of that paragraph, really just simply talks about why you're doing this work. So the rationale so you could start your sentence by saying the rationale that underlies the proposed research is that so-and-so, okay? And one litmus test that you can use to see if you have a strong rationale is to ask yourself this question. Does what I have written tell the reviewer what is likely to become possible after I've completed the research that is not possible now? If the answer is yes, then you've got it. Okay. All right. So the specific aims paragraph, a few things. We know that it's usually, as I said before, 3 to 4 different aims that you would propose. This is the work that you propose to carry out to test your hypothesis. So it must test your central hypothesis. It must grow out of and be completely concordant with either parts of your central hypothesis or your overall objective. It must address the problem. It must fill the gap. These specific aims must be specific. They must be measurable and doable in the time frame of the grant. Okay. And they must be related, but not dependent. What does that mean? The aims that you propose must be cohesive. They must be altogether focused on addressing the need or achieving the overall objective. But you cannot propose an aim that is going to rely on the outcome of another aim. For example, if you propose to do a certain type of work, and the results generated from that work, you then propose to use it to achieve the second aim. That is codependent. That will never fly when reviewers look at it, because if you are not able to successfully achieve aim 1, then because aim 2 is reliant upon the results from aim 1, then your project would go nowhere. And so that's why it's very, very important when you are framing out your specific aims, you need to make sure that they're not dependent on each other, but they must be related to each other. Another tip is to try to avoid descriptive aims. The goal is to define aims that are going to be testing your hypothesis. So the first 3 aims that are listed here on the slide are examples of what we refer to as descriptive aims. Aim 1 is to determine the genotypic allele frequencies of AAA and BBB genes in a closed, unselected, drug-naive population. Aim 2, determine the genotypic allele frequencies of AAA and BBB genes in a population that has been highly selected by frequent long-term drug treatment. And aim 3 is to select alleles that convey resistance by comparing gene expression in the naive population with the frequently treated population. So what do we have here? We have 3 aims. One focuses on work in a naive, drug-naive population. One focuses on generating results in a treated population. And the third is to compare the gene expression between those 2 populations. Those are purely descriptive. Really, what you should ask yourself is, why do you want to do the above? Why do you want to do those 3 things? And if you really think about it, the reason why you would want to do those 3 things is to identify candidate-resistant alleles. That is the aim. That is the specific aim that you should be defining, not the 3 that are listed. The 3 are simply activities that need to be done in order to achieve what is really truly the specific aim. So try to avoid descriptive aims and to ensure that what you're proposing is actually testing the hypothesis that you have defined. The payoff paragraph, how do we build out the bullets for this section? This is actually, again, as I said, an important part for recruiting advocacy from the reviewers that are not assigned to your application. So you describe out your expected outcomes. If you have 3 specific aims, you define what your expected outcomes are from each of those 3 aims. You start off by saying, upon completion of these aims, the expected outcomes are to have X, Y, and Z. Or further, we anticipate having X, Y, and Z. Okay, and you do that until you're done with each of the aims that you have defined in the application. Then the other part is that generality, the impact statement. And here's a perfect example of what we mean by an impact statement. These results are expected to have an important positive impact because they will provide a strong evidence-based proof of principle for further development and future clinical trials of X inhibitors, ultimately providing new opportunities for the development of novel therapies to treat cancer. Here is where you really write the statement that shows how, by you achieving all of the goals in this application, this is what you're set up to be able to accomplish. That is going to be a very important piece to communicate, especially for those reviewers who may not have read your entire application. They'll be able to see very clearly what is the impact of the proposed work. So just to kind of summarize, in terms of the progression of logic in all of these sections, we have those bullets for each of the paragraphs. We turn those bullets into sentences, but we make sure there's a flow of knowledge. When we outline the gap in knowledge in paragraph 1, and we outline the statement of need, the need has to correlate with the gap in knowledge. You talk about the overall objective, that has to tie back to the statement of need. The objective has to address the need. You define your hypothesis, and then you define specific aims that will test the hypothesis. And then at the end, you outline what the expected outcomes, and the outcomes really are supposed to tie back to the overall objective of your application. Okay, so now we'll finish up with common pitfalls for the specific aims page. Most importantly, the interdependence of aims. I think we touched on that earlier. It's really about making sure that what you outline is not dependent upon the other. Of course, describing techniques, that's another common pitfall where investigators have a tendency to actually provide details of methods of what you're going to do in the aims, not necessarily needed. Another concern and pitfall that many investigators have is this concept of being overly ambitious in how you develop the specific aims for your project. For a large grant, say a 5-year grant, which for the NIH, we refer to those types of grants as R01s. Those types of applications, you would expect to see about 2 to 4 aims, depending on what is proposed. For smaller grants that would take a shorter time frame, like 1 to 2 years, you would anticipate 1 to 2 aims. So one of the most important things is to really make sure that what you propose does not come across as being too overly ambitious by having too many aims to be able to achieve. It has to be reasonably achievable within the time frame of the actual grant. And when you do, if you do this and the application, the specific aims page appears overly ambitious, it really gives the reviewers an impression that your proposal is actually unfocused and that you haven't really thought the proposal through. So it's really very important to make sure that you've really thought things through and not propose something that's overly ambitious. And one most important part is the impact. Proposing something where there is no significant impact in the field can truly, truly hurt your application. So it's really critical in the process of you developing your specific aims for your application. When you identify the problem and you've highlighted what the need is, you really have to make sure that you communicate what the impact is going to be. And that impact really needs to be one that's going to move the field forward. That is, in a nutshell, what a very strong specific aims page will accomplish. And so thank you for your attention, and I am open for questions.